Old school versus new school bodybuilding. What's the difference between old school and new school bodybuilding? A question everyone might have when learning a bit more about bodybuilding is, what is old school bodybuilding and why does everyone refer to it as old? Well, to put it shortly, it was a moment in time when the entire community was widely popularized with the help of huge names like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Lee Haney, Franco Columbu, etc., all legends that changed the sport for the better. From there you can only think to yourself, would you rather have trained then or stay with the times and train with the new school techniques? Not that there is a good or bad side to be on, but is here to take a deep dive and discuss the major difference so you can make the choice for yourself. Time period. Thinking about when the golden era started and where our modern era of bodybuilding began definitely has some distance between the two. We can date the golden era back to the 60s and 70s, while we can safely assume that our modern age of bodybuilding can be sometime after the 2000s till now. As of today, that's as far back as 60 years ago, so you can only imagine how different things can have changed for the better. Although we can't take away the teachings along with trial and error from the past, without those, who knows where we would be today. Training differences. As far as training goes, there's no definitive right or wrong. You're right though to assume a big trend for the old school lifters would be lifting heavy with a mid-range amount of repetitions and about 2 to 3 sets. This would be focused a lot on a muscle group that would then be trained up to 2 times a week. As for new school lifters, we tend to see bigger variations of lifts where people will break the workouts up into more volume less reps or less volume higher reps. This allows the bodybuilders to find an area of need that isn't as established as others they're training. Equipment. In the past, as you can see through old movies or just by doing a little research, you can tell a lot of the old school bodybuilders relied heavily on free weights, such as barbells and dumbbells. Not to say they refused to use machines, but at the time they didn't have the same technology as we do today. There will be pros and cons to each and every workout, and it all comes down to what you need to focus on for yourself. Old school lifters didn't have the benefit we do with the new equipment and machines, so they worked with what they had and still reached their goals. Simplicity is what they had, and it didn't overcomplicate workouts. Today you have countless options that can work in many ways for you, so you just have to decide how you want to build. Principles of the two aside, there is no need to shy away from using ideas that work specifically into your regimen. Things like determination and the improvement of invested effort never change. It will never matter how much of your training gets classified as straight to the point about it. Any sort of supplement, PD, or just medicine in general is far more advanced than before. Everything has become more accessible and safer for regular use. Doses these days are much more potent, and lifters do intake a larger amount of these drugs, which can enhance them in ways unlike anything before. Super beneficial to help areas that are lacking behind, and can be a game changer for people competing. Although even with all this advancement, you can only imagine the amount of effort and time put into the gym back then to get the physiques old school bodybuilders had. Conclusion. The new school is much more particular and conscious when compared to the old school era of bodybuilding. Simply by the fitness equipment, advanced supplements, and digital solutions there are today, you can't overlook the upgrade. Although for a lot of people, the physique of the old school bodybuilder is more aesthetically pleasing and proportional than the average new school bodybuilder. The key for them was simplicity, and during training it's all about the intensity and frequency. Principles of the two aside, there is no need to shy away from using ideas that work specifically into your regimen. Things like determination and the improvement of invested effort never change. It will never matter how much of your training gets classified. Comparing old school versus new school bodybuilding. Technically, bodybuilding has existed as a lifestyle endeavor since the 19th century. So when speaking of old school bodybuilding, it can be referencing various eras in the history of both the sport and the culture as a whole. Typically, when people discuss old school bodybuilding, they are referencing 60s and 70s bodybuilding. New school, or modern bodybuilding, focuses on the current era. This, of course, is frequently changing, but can today be labeled as anything post-2000. But what are the actual differences in bodybuilding over the years? Understanding of fitness science and overall technology with each passing year has significantly changed fitness as a whole. So of course, this has changed how professional bodybuilding works as well. Jerry Brainham attempts to trace the entire evolution of the sport and the tactics behind building muscle. Ranging from the early 1900s, through the golden era of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and into the modern era seemingly defined by social media and increased drug use. What is the biggest difference between old school and new school bodybuilding? There is no definitive answer to this question, and the definition of old school and new school will be different for each person. For Jerry Brainham, there is one key difference between these generalized definitions of bodybuilding eras. This comes down to how many times a week a body part is trained. It also comes down to volume and reps. In the old school days, bodybuilders eventually settled on the standard of training a muscle group twice per week. It was also more common for workouts to consist of heavy volume and lower reps. In modern bodybuilding, it has become standard to train each muscle group once per week. To make up for the lack of a second day, a typical workout session now consists of enough exercises for what was once 2 days of work. Modern bodybuilding has also largely moved towards lower volume and higher rep amounts, often training to failure. Of course, this is not solely done by all bodybuilders. There are some like Branch Warren or Guy Cisternino who go more old-school hardcore even to this day. But overall, lower volume and higher reps seem to be the more popular standard in new school bodybuilding. Free weights versus machines. Another big difference between old school and new school bodybuilding is the equipment. Jerry Brainham explains that in older eras of the sport, it was much more common to focus on free weight exercises. This, of course, has led to some to believe that machine exercises are inferior to the old school method. While there are pros and cons to both, the real reason old school bodybuilders did less machines is because there were far less machines in existence. The technology behind exercise machines has increased rapidly. It's only natural for more equipment to be used today in comparison to use in bodybuilding across the decades. Another major difference between bodybuilding today and the old school eras is drug use. It's been commonly assumed that bodybuilders today take more drugs than those in the golden era and earlier. Jerry Brainham seems to agree with this sentiment. While there are no deep studies done comparing the two, anecdotally, many athletes and experts, including Brainham, find that the doses are higher and the drugs more powerful. Not only that, but brand new drugs have entered the arena in modern bodybuilding. Insulin was a drug and used in bodybuilding until the 90s. Milos Sarcev famously claims to have introduced it to the sport. There was also the introduction of SARMs, and their legally gray status, into bodybuilding as well. In addition to this, technology makes this information easier to get, black markets easier to engage with, and drug distribution that much more plentiful. Jerry Brainham also makes a point to mention site enhancement oils. While these aren't drugs in a traditional sense, they are used to fill in lagging small muscles. This probably didn't enter pro bodybuilding until the late 70s. Wrap up.